Thanks for joining us today. My name is Matthias. I'm head of energy with Practical Action. And today we are going to talk about the opportunities that solar irrigation brings to smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and other developing countries to tackle the challenges brought by climate change and also to improve their livelihoods. So we have a great panel. We have 4 people representing the different sector of the solar irrigation system, from distributors, manufacturers, funders, and also experts on the ground. This session will last about 1 hour. I will give a quick introduction to the topic, what we're going to talk about. Then we'll have a short video from our work in Zimbabwe, and then we'll start with the conversation. We'll try to keep 10-15 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. You can put your questions on the platform, on the Passable platform, and then my colleague will pick some of them and put them on the Zoom for me to ask those to the panelists. So just quick introduction to Practical Action, the organization we represent here, and also a thanks to Grant Funds Foundation for the invite to host this session. So we are a global organization working across sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and South Asia. And we've been working for about 50 years tackling some of the toughest challenges across Africa, Latin America, and South Asia, and on the areas of energy access, agriculture, water and waste management, and climate resilience. So here today, we are trying to talk and see and discuss on how really can change and bring to scale adoption of technologies to change the life of smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, and to understand what are the challenges on this. So what is really the problem here? So 65% of poor working adults in the world make a living through agriculture. Those are the most affected to climate change due to higher temperatures, droughts, and floods, which threaten their yields and their crops. Agriculture in much of developing countries is still rain-fed and depends heavily on human and animal labor. And energy isn't really available in those countries, especially in rural areas. More than 600 million people doesn't have access to electricity, and over 1.5 billion doesn't have access to clean cooking fuels and stoves. So there is really little chance of eradicating rural poverty without access to electricity. And how we can increase that? Well, there are some opportunities there, not just on the horizon. So growth in the agriculture sector is shown to be 2 to 4 times more effective in raising in raising incomes amongst the poorest than other sectors. There is a falling cost of solar and also together with increasing availability of more efficient agricultural technologies, which pose an opportunity for smallholder farmers and people who couldn't afford technologies to start to get access to those. But there's also a huge market for that. Lighting Global indicates a 11 billion market just in sub-Saharan Africa for solar technologies for agriculture. And irrigation, access to irrigation, supports higher crop production, which reduces the vulnerability to increasing temperatures, drought, and of course, climate change. But also with increased production, smallholder farmers can increase their incomes, also have more jobs, and plus they can produce more food, which can access also the surrounding communities in rural areas, but also in peri-urban and urban areas. So by combining renewable energy with efficient irrigation technologies like drip irrigation, for example, all this can be achieved without carbon emission or even without depleting water resources. But the challenges remain and across the whole ecosystem. From the supply side, where products are rarely adapted to local context, distribution channels are not yet in place, they're expensive to build, especially for those new technologies and for those customers which weren't reached until just now. On the demand side, of course, there is a big affordability gap, but also other aspects like rural residents are often unaware of the opportunities that those technologies brings. They might lack the skills to use them, and also lack the knowledge of how to adapt their agricultural practices to those technologies. Cultural constraints also make them reluctant in some cases to accept these new practices. Also, the additional production often doesn't find a way to go in wider markets, which might not be there. Policies don't help often. High import tariffs and taxes on energy products. Then, of course, there are often what I say perverse incentives still, which are subsidies on fossil fuels, so chemical fertilizers, and also inadequate quality standards for those technologies. Lack of financial services also is an issue, which is needed by users, last mile and smallholder farmers, to cover up the upfront cost of those technologies, and also for suppliers to invest in these new markets. So I think we would all agree that in the medium term, agriculture productive uses and solar irrigation in this case of energy must pay for itself. But in the short term, funding is needed to overcome those barriers. So really, what we need is a systemic approach, understand the role of those different stakeholders and see how they can all work together. And this is the sort of spirit on the basis of which we built this session and with this panel. So I will launch now a short video of our work in Zimbabwe, just to give you a perspective of the work a taste of the work on the ground, how all this we're talking about looks really. So with some experience from Zimbabwe, 3 minutes video, and then we start with the conversation, with the discussion with our excellent panelists. So please enjoy the video.
Ivuya kwakulinywa lapho. Kulinywa but kule nkinga yamanzi ngoba sasisebenzisa amanzi edamu, so idamu laliphela. Ekuqaleni kwethu kulima saqala ukulima umumbu. Asavuna sibili, akunye sathengisa, safaka ezikhwameni ze-irrigation, okunye sa-support izimuli emakhaya. Sakhipha umumbu, safaka amabhathanathi, kwaba njalo futhi. Kade sesifaka i-beans.
Practical action basifundisa ukubana kulabantu i-committee le-outhiwa nge-marketing. I-marketing isebenza ukusingela i-market kuqala kokubana silime ulutho, baqala besidingela indawo lapho esizathengisela khona izilimo zethu. So izilimo zethu kodwa ikakhulu khona lapha esigabeni senelisa futhi njalo ukuthengisa izilimo zethu. Silezitolo ema-business shops aseduzane khona lapho. Njalo laba bantu basifundisa lokufusha imali. Sasingakwazi thina ukubana kuyafushwa imali, konke thina esasilima sasibonga ukulima nje sizisebenzisela. Kodwa namhlanje sesikwazi ukubana imali yethu kumele siyifushe, siyizalise, senelise ukubana isithuthukise. Kathi sesikwazi ukufusha imali, senelise ukubana siboleke isakane izimali, senelise ukubhadelela abantwana bethu esikolo.
Find that many of those committee members were actually individually trying to go and procure solar equipment so that they do some form of business. And I found that the biggest actually impact, because just seeing that progress is possible and you can bring in hope to people, then it changes their mindset towards what they are able to achieve. And it was also important that, you know, people could actually say we aren't hungry anymore. It's something that may sound cliche, but it's something so real for a lot of communities that we work with.
Thanks. Fortunately, I think most of you have seen the same challenges I had to read the subtitles. It was not very clear. So I think the link to the video is going to be posted there on the chat box in the platform. And I recommend you to look at that because it's to be enjoyed with subtitles, really, to be really understood. Great. Thanks to my colleagues who underwork in Zimbabwe and this video. So let's start with the conversation. Let me quickly introduce our panel today. So we have Maria Gross. She's an agricultural expert from Practical Action. She's been working in the agri sector in Zimbabwe for many years, and she really bring the voice and understanding of the smallholder farmers in Zimbabwe. Then we'll have Sharon Yeti, who's the CEO from Power Live, a last mile distributor in Zimbabwe, bringing in the voice of and the challenges of distributing solar pumps and other energy products in Zimbabwe. We have Anis Sakreni, who's the partnership development manager from Grandfos Safe Water, and she will bring in the perspective of a large manufacturer trying to build sustainable markets in Africa. And finally, we have Lucinda Thieser, who's the program officer for climate and environmental at the Embassy of Sweden in Harare. And she will talk about what's the role of donors and what type of funds are needed to develop this sector. So we start with Maria, and please join me in welcoming all those four panelists. I will start with Maria, really to start to hear from her, understanding what are really the needs of those smallholder farmers. So Maria, tell us a bit how climate change is affecting the environment and the farming in Zimbabwe. Which technologies can play an important role in adaptation and improvement of the livelihoods? And what is the progress with the adoption of those technologies? We have about 5 minutes. Maria, if you want to give us a bit of a taste of the situation there, please.
Okay, thank you, Matthias, and welcome to everyone who's managed to join us. The problem really with farming in Zimbabwe, especially for the vulnerable communities, the smallholder farmers, in relation to responding to the climate change impact as well, is that there's prolonged droughts, long periods of dryness, and then in other areas, they might also be followed with flash flooding. And all that it does is to disrupt the farming and the value chains we are normally running with are the small grains, which are adaptable in the arid areas of Zimbabwe, from region 4 and 5, which are very dry and they have very little water. And then we also bring in solar powered irrigation with help from donors who are like-minded and who are also working towards building resilience. So we work with horticultural crops, value crops like the leafy vegetables, some tomatoes, and then the small grains. So because of the climate change and the extreme weather events, it's very difficult for the farmers now to be able to plan adequately. So what we've done is we've combined the solar powered irrigation with water harvesting so that when the flash floods do come during the first 2 months of the season, we are able to harness that water as well and at the same time replenish the underground water surfaces. But the flood irrigation and the flooding itself is also disrupting communication networks and also road networks, which further marginalizes these farmers. So the solar powered irrigation, we bring in renewable energy, and we're also trying to identify as well other technologies which will use the excess energy, solar energy, so that they also do off-farm kind of work, so that we also bring in the youth. So the greatest challenge now is that since the COVID, it has further marginalized the farmers because the markets which they used to find for the horticulture crops, they are no longer able to get to the markets, and the road networks because of the extreme flooding and the degradation of the roads and also the natural environment, it has become really difficult for the farmer, and they continue getting marginalized by the continued weather. Over to you, Matthias. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. That was a quick snapshot and a useful snapshot of the situation in Zimbabwe. Not really great from what I hear. And I think we'll go back to this later after we finish this first round of interventions. And so you talked a bit about what's the sort of experience and situation in the agriculture sector in Zimbabwe. And now we move to Sharon Yeti, and really to understand what are the challenges for a company who set up in Zimbabwe, tries to reach out to those smallholder farmers, even in the most remote areas, to provide them with the technologies like solar pumps. So if Sharon, you can tell us a bit what what you've learned from working on this sector, what you would say I would like this audience to retain as a sort of learning from your experience in terms of challenges, but also what is work in distributing those products, and also if you can tell us a bit about your business model, really about selling solar pumps or even other technologies. Thanks, Sharon. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Matthias. Well, firstly, let me start by saying Practical Action is doing a commendable job, and I think you should keep it up. Now, as Powerline Zimbabwe, we have mostly been selling, distributing, and installing scalable solar home and business energy systems for productive use, like solar water pumps on pay-as-you-go in the rural and off-grid areas of Zimbabwe. Now, the challenges that we've mostly faced has been in the distribution of solar water pumps. Some of these farmers reside in very remote and hard to reach areas. There's also been the issue of affordability of the systems by the small scale farmers. Most of these farmers are not able to afford these systems. And also coming to the issue of duty for these appliances is really high. So you find that the price, like I've mentioned, is mostly out of the income range for these people. Now, there's also a lack of awareness. Most people are not aware of the benefits of using solar water pumps. So I think it's some of those challenges that we faced. Now, about the lessons that we've learned from our customers, we've learned that the farmers are prepared to adopt modern technology given favorable terms and accessibility. They can also commercialize their farming activities if they can get all the necessary inputs. And then there's also need to offer extension services to get optimum output. And then we've also noted that farmers not only want water for production, but also for domestic use as well. Now, for a business model, we mostly use the pay-as-you-go business model. Now, we've mostly resorted to this because of the high costs of the solar appliances. Now, this enables them to use the solar systems and be able to pay it while they use it. So I think it's been really great so far because the uptake has been increasing by the farmers. Thank you, Matthias.
Thanks, Sharon. Sorry, quick follow-up question just to better understand about this pay-as-you-go system. So this is for the solar home system, or is also you started to adopt it in the solar pumping?
The solar water pumps.
Solar water pumps, yeah.
Also, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sharon. Okay. So now we move from the large manufacturer, Grundfos, Anis, which is also has this business unit which really works in this difficult market and try to find solutions which are really sustainable and affordable for all. And so Anis, tell us a bit more how a company like Grundfos see this market in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in other least developed countries. And I mean, from your experience, what do you think would be needed in terms of enabling environment, supporting services, and anything else really to make it viable in the long term? And feel free to introduce yourself and also Grundfos, of course. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthias. So yes, I work for a strategic business unit within Grundfos that is focused, as you said, on underserved communities around the world, primarily focusing on Africa and Asia. And Grundfos is known as being one of the largest pump manufacturers in the world, and we have a footprint in over 50 countries around the globe. So traditionally, when we talk about this sector, we have engaged in the larger scheme irrigation solutions more directly, but when it comes to the smallholder agricultural value chain, we've been very reliant on our channel partners, as we call them, or our distributors, who are the ones that engage at a local level. I will say that, from the perspective of a large company, that we understand that providing solutions to smallholder farmers is complex. But I think we underestimate how complex agricultural production is, because we're not involved in the business of agricultural production. We're involved in the business of providing a solution to that value chain. So to a large extent, we are very reliant on our partners that we work with to give us an idea of how we can best contribute into that value chain and what are the right solutions that we can offer. I think the feedback that we get is that the approach at the moment is rather standardized, that we are offering packaged solutions, and for very good reasons. A lot of them that Sharon has already alluded to around logistical challenges and how to make the offering simple for the smallholder farmer, but that this isn't necessarily the ideal situation, and that climate resilience is much more than providing the pump, and that there are, as your video showed, there are other techniques and for agricultural production that need to be incorporated. So what we are trying to do as Grundfos is to bring the partners together so that we can create solutions that are the right solutions for the farmer, because as both Maria and Sharon have talked about, these farmers are already struggling, and we want to ensure that the solutions they're being provided with will actually result in increased production at the end of the day, and income generation. So we have in our channel to market, we have our distributors who are on the ground, who are able to provide that kind of support, and are able, as Sharon talks about, to be able to actually go out into those rural areas. So we're identifying distributors that are focused on irrigation solutions, and actually some of which are going really to great lengths to meet the needs of smallholder farmers. And to give you an example, we have a distributor in Uganda who is not only providing pumping solutions, but also has agronomists as part of their workforce. They visit the farms, even the small scale under 1 hectare farms. They provide advisory service to the farmers on what would be the right solution for them, and also bearing in mind that what are their scaling ambitions as well in terms of their production. And then one thing which is extremely vital is they provide the after sales support. So in other words, they continue to ensure that the systems work for the farmers. And I think, as you've alluded to, Sharon, one of the challenges is really, in terms of the pay-as-you-go model, is what are the risks around that model? And how can we ensure that the farmers' systems continue to work and are producing for them, so that at the end of the day, they are able to pay back on their systems. So what we're doing as Grundfos is bringing our skills into the picture by offering capacity building to our distributors, and as you mentioned, we hope to combine that with drinking water, and drawing in our value chain partners globally that are working in the agriculture sector to address the different elements of the value chain. We're also trying to reduce the cost of capital for many of the asset financiers and the companies like Sharon's, to actually make it more affordable, because one of the biggest problems is that the microfinancing institutions are borrowing money at high interest rates, and therefore they have to reflect that in their prices. So how can we help to bring that down by bringing in different forms of investors? And finally, we're trying to focus on the selection criteria for the right solutions, and thinking more in terms of life cycle cost rather than just the upfront capex cost, because very often what that means is that the farmers are paying high prices for inferior quality solutions. So what we want to encourage is that, you know, when farmers are evaluating what is the right solution for them, that they're taking into consideration what are the maintenance requirements, what's it going to cost me to replace my solar battery, when will I have to do that, and how do I plan for that? Over to you, Matthias.
While Matthias is working on his technicalities, there's a question from wait, if I can find it. We have a couple of questions that came in from Henk Holtzlack for Maria. There are two questions. One, you mentioned water harvesting. Can you explain more what type? And two, do you also disseminate or explore smaller solar systems in range of $200 to $500? Maria, would you like to respond to that? Have we lost Maria?
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, my Zoom has crashed, and now looks I have two open. Just give me a second.
And then there's a question from Moline Sharuka, who would like to ask Sharon, besides offering technical intervention in the form of solar pumps, do you also offer awareness and training to the smallholder farmers? Would also like to know from where they pump the water besides rainwater harvesting.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we do. I think earlier on when I mentioned the point of extension services, I think it was kind of broad, but that's what I meant, that there's after-sales support. We visit them from time to time to see if they're facing any challenges. We send SMSs from time to time, just probably update them on how they can benefit more, tips on how to recycle water and conserve and issues like that. So yes, we do train, and we do make follow-ups after that to see how they're doing and using the systems.
Thanks, I'm back. I'm so really sorry, my Zoom crashed and then I had two open. So I hope you can hear me well. Yeah, okay, great. I wanted to thank Anis. I could follow your full intervention. It was great, really, articulate, and also the nuances you exposed. I think they are really helpful for this conversation. It's also good to hear that a company like Grundfos is thinking at at that level of depth, really. And so again, with apologies for my disappearance for a couple of minutes, I think now we have our last speaker, Lucinda, who represents a donor, SIDA, the Swedish government. And so we wanted to hear from her a bit about what she thinks, what the role of a donor, how they can support the creation of those markets, solar, irrigation, or other solar technologies for agriculture in countries like Zimbabwe and other countries, sub-Saharan Africa. Again, thinking about the wider system, but also bringing in some examples from their work, if possible, but also to think about what type of funds are possible. I mean, how those money coming from a donor can be used better to develop those systems. Lucinda, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks very much, Matthias. I've also had a little bit of technology challenges this morning, so I hope that I hope you all can hear me and that I stay online. So my name is Lucinda Tizer. I'm the Program Officer for Climate and Environment at SIDA, the Swedish Embassy in Harare, Zimbabwe. And yeah, I think the first thing to emphasize is SIDA's work is about lifting people out of poverty. But in the context of Zimbabwe and in many places in the rest of the world, the environmental protection is very closely linked to this. The Zimbabwe economy is very heavily dependent on rain-fed agriculture. And so there's people's lives and livelihoods that are becoming incredibly vulnerable to the changing climate that we are experiencing. And what we have to try to remember is the majority of people do not have alternative income sources. They don't have insurance policies if crops fail. And so since 2017, CEDA have been trying to address these issues. So we have some examples. We supported Practical Action, which is putting solar irrigation into a drought-prone area of Zimbabwe. We've done similar work with Oxfam. Through the AECF, we are supporting the private sector. So they get grants if they are providing renewable energy solutions for smallholder farmers. And with UNICEF, we've worked with young people on internship schemes for environmental companies and providing catalyst funding for young entrepreneurs. I think if I go on to a little bit about the funding and how the finance can work, it's a difficult issue. I think the donor can play the role of reducing risk. In Zimbabwe, lenders are very, very cautious. You know, we have been through a period of high inflation. So if the donor can provide some sort of guarantee or an interest-free loan or a grant in demonstration, sorry, beg your pardon. If the donor can provide a guarantee or an interest-free loan or a grant, if they can provide demonstration plots and try and show examples that work, it might just make that finance ecosystem a bit more favorable. And yeah, I think Sharon mentioned this, the issue of pay-as-you-go. That model can really help the cash flow of the individual farmer. But then it's the business that has to bear that brunt of the upfront cost. So can the donor come in there and support that area? Thank you. Over.
Great, thanks, Lucinda. Thanks, helpful to hear this, and also to see how the donors have changed, and you're not just supporting the implementation of projects, but also supporting, you know, companies in the private sector to de-risk their investments, and that's, I'm sure, helps a lot the sector. So I think I have one sort of question for all the panelists before we move into the QA for the audience, which, by the way, I remind can put their questions in the Pattable platform, and then my colleague will pick them and put them and send them to me. And I think also we lost my colleague Maria, unfortunately. We're a bit cursed with technologies today. Okay, a question for, I guess, for all the panelists which are left with us. Really just 1-2 minutes answer, and I think in part already answer, but it's really to get the audience a sense of priority and urgency. So I mean, from your perspective, what really the primary change that needs to happen to build this opportunity for solar irrigation in sub-Saharan Africa? So the main change, and what's the role your organization is going to play in the next years to make this happen? So Sharon, should we start with you?
Thank you, Matthias. I think first and foremost, would like to take a look at the pricing of the solar water pumps and the duty. So I think if the government could work on taking off duty or reducing the duty on some of the solar water pumps, it would really help. This would work as a subsidy to lower down the prices for easy uptake by the farmers. And I think also the other thing is to increase the awareness, you know, to just make sure that all those people who live in the remote areas are aware of, like I've said earlier on, the benefits of using solar water pumps. And the role that Followup will play in the next 3 years to make this happen, we're going to work on increasing awareness. I think it's a point that I've mentioned over and over again, and I think it's something that we're going to work towards and ensure that everyone is aware that there are solar water pumps and that we're also selling them on a pay-as-you-go model. I think we're also going to be providing solar-powered equipment to the farmers, such as pumps for drip micro irrigation, solar-powered dryers to mitigate post-harvest for these farmers. So I think we're just going to work and make sure that we increase the awareness and we make lives for these farmers as easy as we can. Thank you, Matthias.
Thanks, Sharon, and good luck with your work there. can also see Maria is back. So Maria, I'm not sure you heard the question I've asked all panelists, which is, just to repeat it, is what is the main change that you think needs to happen to bring this opportunity alive, this solar irrigation for smallholder farmers, and what's the role an organization like yours will play in the next years to make this happen? So to give you that, if you want to go straight, please, Maria.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. I think as an organization, Practical Action, we really want to see systemic change. And we've already started working towards that by also influencing the policy arena, because it's only when the policy is supportive and creates an enabling environment, that's when we'll be able to see systemic change. And at the same time, we are also going out there and trying to form communities of practice where we also are building awareness in terms of the most marginalized communities where even government schemes do not reach, and also continue building the capacity. Like Sharon said, most of the issues is to do with also lack of information, knowledge, and the skills. So as Practical Action, we are advocating to also bring in agroecology, which is a resilient and environmentally friendly farming practice, and also influencing policies.
Great, thanks, Maria, and good luck as well for you with your work in Zimbabwe. Anis,
Thank you.
Want to tell us what are your plans?
Yeah, so I mean, you can get overwhelmed by the agricultural sector and all that needs to be done. So I think what we hope to do is to listen to the implementers in the sector and understand how we can support them. As I mentioned, build our distribution network so that we can actually meet the demand more locally and reach those far to reach communities. And I think also what we'd like to do is to encourage considering the holistic needs of the community in terms of water access. So we're very much focused on solar irrigation, which is this kind of single use of the system. And actually, I think if we want to make this viable and have a bigger impact, and also scalable, then I think we need to also be thinking about how can we incorporate the drinking water element, and that's something we're very focused on. How can we establish multi-use water systems which meet the entire water needs of the local communities that they're placed in?
Great, interesting point, Anis. Thank you very much. Lucinda?
Hi, thanks. So yeah, so what can the role of the donor be in moving this forward? Yeah, that it resonates with me what Anis said about feeling overwhelmed, because quite often you feel the pressure is on you. But there definitely are things that the role that the donor can play. I think what Sharon mentioned, we can also help with dialogue with the government when it comes to the issue of duty. We can also help with raising awareness. I see there was a question in the chat about the donors' demonstration plots and how that can help. We can't, unfortunately, put these solar irrigation schemes everywhere around the country. We can't do it for everybody who needs it. But we have worked with Practical Action and with Oxfam to do some, and hopefully that'll demonstrate that they do generate income, and it might make a lender more open to working in that area. And then, of course, as I've mentioned, you have your various ways of financing, whether it's through supporting an NGO, whether it's through working with banks to provide a guarantee, and just to make that lending environment a little less risky.
Great, thanks, Lucinda, and thanks for picking up one of the questions. So I think it's now time for having a 10 minutes conversation across with the audience. I have Anne is picking some of the questions, putting them in my chat box. So I'm going to select some of them. I think some are common, some are for specific panelists. So we start with one for Sharon, which is Martin Fisher asking, how are you working to get farmers to pay for pay-as-you-go during the rainy season? That seems to be one of the major challenges for using pay-as-you-go for irrigation pumps. So he's interested to hear what's your approach to that.
Sorry, I didn't get the first part.
How are you working to get farmers to pay for pay-as-you-go during the rainy season when water is there anyway, and therefore they have a pump, which is probably or perhaps not being used? So how are you going to get them to pay?
Well, we have some farmers who live in areas that don't have lots of rainfall. So those are the areas that we mostly target, because we know that even when most of the country is getting a lot of rainfall, some of these areas are not getting enough rainfall to do any type of farming. So when we work with those, we know that even when it's raining, they would still be able to do their payments for pay-as-you-go.
Great, interesting to hear. And perhaps a follow-up question from me on this. Is there any change on the sort of crop or type of practices that those farmers have to adopt in order to start using solar pumps? I mean, from your experience, I mean, you talked about, and even Anis was talking about some of the training being given to farmers adopting pumps. So how much of that you need to do for them to actually start using them within their current practices and perhaps starting new agricultural practices?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
So how much training or support do you need to give your customers to use those pumps within their current practices and perhaps to start to adopt them through new practices?
Well, I think training is a very essential component for most of these people, so that they reap the most benefits from using solar water pumps. So I think training is needed at the beginning, even when they've started using the solar water pumps, and even after the warranty period is over for us. So I think it's something that we always prioritize when it comes to using solar water pumps training for these small scale farmers.
Great, thanks. I think we have another question, which is probably for you, Sharon, again, but also perhaps Anis can answer this because I think it also applies to her, which is really about thinking about financing model, which, I mean, what kind of financing model do you think would work to make those solar pump affordable and accessible to the most vulnerable farmers? I mean, we talked about pay-as-you-go. You also need to share some of your concern related to pay-as-you-go. So what do you think would be suitable financing model? Well, I guess it's a variety of them, but if you can make some examples, one example.
Should I go first? Yeah, so I think, I mean, one of the things that I mentioned already was around the cost of capital, right? So bringing in investors that are perhaps impact investors who are looking for different forms of return and not just the actual interest rate that is applied. So I think that's one of the opportunities. I think also what we're trying to understand is, you know, that there are models that are applied to this, both utilities, if you like, electricity and water, around how you charge for the service. And that's why the multi-use water system is something that we want to explore, because actually what you can begin to do is talk about how do you cross-subsidize different uses of water, like we've talked about for electricity, and how can we set up the business model so that we are not placing all the burden on a single farmer, for example. And I know one of the questions that Lucy from Practical Action posed was around, you know, well, how do you get the water to the farmers then, because they're not necessarily farming in a way that is conducive to a multi-use water system. But I think that's all the kind of thing that we need to develop in these pilot multi-use water system models, is how do we bring the services to the customers in a way that doesn't mean that they are changing their practices so significantly that they're not going to buy into the system.
Thanks, Anis. Let me link another question to this, and perhaps Sharon can pick that up first, but also, good to hear maybe from Lucinda about that, and from you, Anis, as well. Someone is asking about your thoughts about government subsidies, whether they're smart, time-bound, for solar irrigations to make them more affordable. Now, subsidies can go to the supply, can go to the demand. It would be good to hear your thoughts about, government and public finances, whether you think they can help and how can they help the adoption of those technologies. Sharon, if you want to go first, then we'll go to Lucinda and then perhaps Anis.
Sorry, can you repeat the first part? I got the last part.
Sorry, is the role, what you think about the role of public funding, like subsidies, to help the adoption of those technologies? And perhaps, thinking about the subsidies for the suppliers, but also to reduce the cost, but also to the customers. Yeah.
Well, I think firstly, they help in that they make these systems affordable for this small scale farmers. First and foremost, I think for Powerlight, that would be a huge one. The fact that we'll be able to sell systems to people who can actually afford them. So I think having subsidies would also help us in that would be able to distribute more of the systems to more of these people who can actually afford them as well.
Thanks. And Lucinda, what do you think about this, public money? And also, I'd be interested to hear about how you deal with governments and how your money might blend or not with public funding.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think in the context of Zimbabwe, I do agree with Sharon. I think there's a need for these technologies, and the people who need them have a huge issue with affordability. So there is a place for a subsidy. Just what you have to bear in mind and be careful about is distorting the market. I think in an ideal world, the private sector would be able to meet that need in an affordable way. Of course, we've got a few challenges where a government subsidy could help address that. And in terms of how CEDA work with the government, unfortunately in Zimbabwe, we don't work directly with government at present. We do so in other countries, but not Zimbabwe at the moment. We are in dialogue with them extensively, and we also work with partners who work with them. So yes, there's collaboration, but there's not direct financing in Zimbabwe at the moment.
Great, thanks, Lucinda. I'm sure the Zimbabwe situation is, and all of these, in fact, all this conversation is very context related. We're trying to extract some general lessons, but of course, it's so specific to the context and even to the agriculture sector, specific value chain that we're talking about. That's been my experience coming from the energy access space, entering the agricultural space, understanding the complexity, the nuances that are there, and really how we should probably start really from the needs of agriculture value chains, and why we often start from the energy. And so it's important to really start from the agricultural side. We have one question, which I think, whoever wants to pick it, raise your hand or tell me you want to answer to this. Someone is asking, to those who have supplied solar pumps in Zimbabwe. So I guess it's Sharon, it's probably Maria with the Project Practical Action, perhaps Anis as well. And they're curious to hear about whether each farmer have their own pump, or pumps are like shared by groups of farmers or cooperatives. And if it's groups, what have you learned about the best ways to have those dynamic works well, how this is managed really within those groups? I don't know if Maria or Sharon wants to answer this. Maria, please.
Okay, thanks, Matthias. Currently, the model we've been working with, given the facts, the reality is that the communities we work with can't afford to buy these technologies. We've been setting them up into farming associations or farming irrigation farming groups. And whenever we come in and we have donor funding, they bring in about 10% co-payment so that they have ownership and they take responsibility. and also to ensure that there's sustainability beyond the project. So we bring in also soft skills training in terms of group governance. We also come in with transformative gender and also leadership training, because in our experience, we noticed that most of the farmers out there, 60% of them are women-headed households. So when the money starts coming in, at times there are cases of gender-based violence because most of the spouses have gone outside the border to look for alternative sources of livelihoods for their families. But when the gardens or the irrigation starts bringing in the money, the horticulture value chains we spoke about, the leafy vegetables, the tomatoes and the green beans, the men now at times want to come in and take charge of how that money is going to be used. And at times it doesn't go back. So we also bring in the gender perspective, or our interventions are based on transformative gender. And we also talk to the leadership. We also bring in the youth. And then we bring in savings and lending schemes where the farmers themselves put aside a certain portion of the income they generate so that they are able to maintain the equipment and the installations. So currently that is the model we're using, because individual farmers are not able to afford the systems. Thank you, Matthias.
Thanks, Maria. Really insightful, and thanks for bringing in the dynamic as well of how much is important to understand the role of women in the agricultural sector, and really when we're talking about working with those group of farmers, understanding how how all those needs differ. Okay, I think we have 4 minutes left, so I will thank the audience for their questions, and perhaps if anybody has some last question. Otherwise, I will ask each. Okay, yeah, we have one last question, and then we go for final remarks. And so again, Martin Fisher, has experienced the majority of irrigation farmers use their pumps to plant multiple cycles of high-value crops like horticulture and harvest and sell them in the off-season. Are you also finding the majority of farmers are growing fruit and vegetables? I guess those ones who are adopting solar pumps. I mean, is horticulture perhaps the most relevant value chain for making solar pumps affordable? I don't know who wants to answer this one. Okay, Maria, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Currently, yes, we're focusing on agriculture because in the areas we are operating with, it's number one, they are very dry, no rainfall. So these are the only green belts you find within Matabeleland South and other areas which are dry. And then besides only agriculture focused, we also bring in energy kiosks where the youth are able to sell energy lanterns, and they're also able to provide mobile phone charging services. And those are some of the interventions which we've also done so that we also involve the youth as well.
Okay, thanks. And I think we need to close. So I would like each panelist to give one message that would like the audience to bring home today. And so we'll go clockwise, starting from Sharon. One message, 20 seconds max.
Oh, I was muted. Sorry. Well, I would like to say that I would like to urge investors to provide more patient capital to facilitate the mass adoption of solar-powered water pumps. It would really go a long way.
Great, thanks. So a call for more suitable funding for last mile distribution.
Yes.
Anis.
Yeah, that's a challenge in 20 seconds, but I think we're looking forward to working with our partners in the value chain and to the extent possible support in getting these systems to scale and bringing to bear what Grundfos can offer and attracting financing that makes it more feasible for the likes of Sharon to actually implement.
Great, thanks, Anis. Lucinda.
In 20 seconds, I think what I'd like to emphasize is the need, this is a challenge that is encompassing us all, civil society, government, private sector, donors. I think this has been a nice example of us all coming together, and we have to solve the challenge all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucinda. And Maria, 20 seconds.
I'll almost re-echo what Lucinda said. We need a multi-sectoral approach where private sector, government, and the farmers' voices, they need to be heard and taken into account, because most cases, civil society are the ones who are just going and representing the farmers, but the farmers themselves, we also need to build their capacity for them to come into these negotiation forums and also influence and have their voices heard. So multi-sectoral approach is key for us to address the diversity of challenges out there. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I think I will endorse and will this final message about looking at the whole system working together. And I think, and also starting from really understanding the needs of smallholder farmers in specific contexts. I think this panel sort of shown this diversity and the need to talk, understand the role of each other, perspectives, but also to work together towards this. So I want to thank the panelists. Thank you very much for your time contribution today. I've learned a lot. I hope our audience as well have learned and enjoyed the panel. And yeah, wish you a good day. I think whoever has posed questions which were not answered in the chat box might find an answer later on today. So I think some panelists will stay on just answering on the chat. Thanks everyone. I enjoyed this, and yeah, see you soon, I hope. Bye.